Before we start, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, can you please tell me from where and what time you're watching? Thanks.
Carlos had spent years clawing his way through the underground music scene, producing tracks in a cramped apartment that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. His big break always felt just out of reach, teasing him like a shadow slipping through his fingers. Then, one night, as he scrolled mindlessly through his emails, his phone buzzed. A DM, the kind that makes your breath hitch in your throat. It was from someone deep inside the industry. Someone who had connections. Real connections. You're invited to an exclusive party this weekend. Diddy will be there. It's your chance. Carlos's hands trembled as he read the message again. It had to be real. This was the kind of opportunity that could change everything. But as his pulse quickened, so did the gnawing whisper in the back of his mind. He'd heard things about these parties. Whispers of something beyond the flashing lights and the endless supply of champagne. Rumors of rituals, of invitations that came with unseen costs. He silenced the doubt. Hunger for success drowned out fear. This was his moment. The instructions were clear. Midnight. Alone. The location was a mansion in the Hollywood Hills, nestled deep in the wealthiest part of town, where streetlights flickered as if they too feared the dark. When the night came, unease curled around Carlos like a second skin. The road twisted through towering trees, their branches clawing at the sky. His palms were slick on the steering wheel as the GPS led him higher and deeper into a part of the city where silence felt intentional. And then, the mansion. A fortress of glass and stone, its iron gates yawning open the moment his car rolled near. No buzzer, no guard, just a silent welcome, as though the house had been expecting him. A man in a black suit stood at the door, eyes hollow, skin taut like a stretched mask. He opened the door before Carlos could even knock. The air inside was thick with perfume, alcohol, something metallic. The music pulsed through the walls, heavy bass thumping like a second heartbeat. Celebrities, models, producers, they were all there, basking in their own manufactured glow. But something was off. The laughter was too loud, the smiles too wide, the eyes empty, as though their bodies were there, but something else had long since moved in. Carlos waded through the crowd, shaking hands, nodding at familiar faces. This was his shot, but no one seemed to care. Conversations slipped past him like whispers on the wind, meaningless and cold. He noticed how people kept stealing glances toward the back of the room. A door, slightly ajar, guarded by two men in identical suits. It pulsed with an energy that made his teeth ache. Then she appeared. A woman in black, her beauty sharp enough to draw blood. She pressed a glass of champagne into his hand, leaned in close. Her breath was cool against his ear. "You've been selected." Carlos swallowed. For what? She only smiled, the kind of smile that promised things best left unknown. Then she pointed. The door. His feet moved before his brain could argue. The guard stepped aside without a word. Beyond the threshold, the party sounds faded, replaced by something else. A low, rhythmic chanting, a language older than any he had ever heard. A candlelit hallway stretched before him, the walls too dark, too smooth, as if they absorbed the light. His breath hitched, but he kept walking deeper into the silence until he reached a heavy wooden door. He pushed it open. The room inside was cavernous, bathed in flickering candlelight. At its center stood an altar of polished stone, glistening with something wet. Around it, figures in black robes, their faces hidden, their voices rising and falling in an ancient hymn. On the altar, a black goat, bound, its wide, panicked eyes locked onto Carlos. It knew. One of the robed figures stepped forward, a blade glinting in the candlelight. The chanting swelled, feverish, manic. The knife plunged. The goat screamed. Blood cascaded onto the altar in a thick, glistening pool. Carlos tried to move, to breathe, but the air was thick, suffocating. The shadows on the walls twisted, stretching unnaturally, writhing like living things. A cold hand gripped his shoulder. He spun around. No one was there. Then one of the robed figures stepped forward, hands reaching for the hood. The room fell silent as the fabric slipped away. Carlos's blood turned to ice. It was her, not just any her. The face that had graced countless television screens, the woman the world adored, Oprah Winfrey. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes, voids where something ancient and unfathomable lurked. A slow, measured step forward, and Carlos felt his knees buckle. "You weren't supposed to see this," she said, her voice eerily soft. Carlos's throat was dry, his heart hammered against his ribs. "This world you want so badly to be part of," she continued, tilting her head. "It's not what you think. There's a price for everything, Carlos. And now," a pause, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Now that you've seen, there's no going back." Carlos's body took over where his mind failed. He turned and ran, sprinting down the hallway, the chanting surging behind him. The walls seemed to close in, the candles flickering out one by one. He burst back into the party, but something was wrong. The music had stopped. The guests were motionless, standing in eerie unison, their eyes locked onto him, vacant, waiting. He didn't wait to see what they were waiting for. He ran out of the mansion, past the iron gates, down the winding road, as far as his legs would carry him. He left his car, his career, his dreams behind, fleeing into the night like a hunted animal. Carlos disappeared from the music scene after that. Stopped producing. Stopped talking to anyone from his past. When he finally told me what happened, I could see it in his eyes. The fear, the knowledge that some things don't stay buried. He still hears the chanting sometimes, when the night is deep and the world is quiet. And when he does, he knows they are still watching, waiting. Maya had spent years clawing her way up the ranks of the dance industry, pouring sweat and blood into her routines, grinding through auditions that ended in nothing but polite rejection. But now, finally, she was on the cusp of something big. Landing a gig as one of Jennifer Lopez's background dancers wasn't just a job. It was a dream materializing in real time. She was no longer one of the faceless hopefuls in an overcrowded casting room. People were starting to notice her. The night after a major performance, someone from Diddy's team approached her. The invitation was simple, spoken with the kind of casual confidence that assumed there would be no hesitation. "Diddy's throwing a party tonight. You're invited." She'd heard about Diddy's parties. Everyone had. The stories whispered in green rooms between dancers and musicians were half myth, half promise. These parties were where careers were made, where connections turned into million-dollar contracts, and maybe where secrets were buried. Maya said yes without thinking. The mansion was a fortress of excess, gilded walls, vaulted ceilings, chandeliers dripping with crystal. The air smelled of perfume, expensive liquor, and something else. Something she couldn't quite name. The rooms were filled with celebrities, models, and producers who ran the industry like a puppeteer's hands in an old marionette show. Laughter echoed through the halls, but it was hollow, scripted. Even as she sipped her drink, Maya could feel it, an undercurrent of something wrong. People disappeared into side rooms and came out looking different. Some of them never came out at all. At some point, someone, she never saw their face, grabbed her hand and pulled her toward a staircase leading upstairs. She thought it was just another guest. She thought they were leading her somewhere fun. She was wrong. The room was dark, heavy with velvet curtains drawn so tightly, that not even the glow of the city could seep in. A round table sat in the center, surrounded by people dressed in wealth. Their faces were just shadows, indistinct in the dim lighting. They did not look at her. They did not speak. It felt like stepping into a nightmare, and Maya wasn't sure if she was awake anymore. A man in a tailored suit leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear. The party doesn't really begin until after midnight. Her skin prickled. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to leave. But the door she had come through was gone. Not closed. Gone. After that, her memories fractured. She would later recall flashes. Hallways too long and dark. Laughter that wasn't quite human. Hands gripping her wrists. Voices speaking in a language she didn't understand. And then there was Diddy, standing at the top of a grand staircase, watching it all. Watching her. His face unreadable, and then nothing. Maya woke up 3 days later in a room that wasn't hers. The walls were white. Sterile. The air smelled of something metallic, faintly sweet. Her body ached, like she'd been running for miles, but she had no memory of dancing. No memory of moving at all. Around her, others lay unconscious, some on couches, some sprawled on the floor. Their faces were slack, bodies drained. They weren't dead, but they weren't alive either. Her phone was dead. When she found a charger and powered it up, the date sent an ice pick through her gut. 3 days. 3 days had disappeared into a void she couldn't remember. Maya left the mansion in a daze. No one stopped her. No one even looked at her. When she got home, her family was hysterical. Friends had been searching for her, calling non-stop. Her manager had been on the verge of filing a missing person report. But Maya had no answers, no explanation. Just a hollow space where memories should have been. She tried to go back to dancing, but something was wrong. Her body no longer felt like her own. The fluid grace she had once possessed was gone. Every movement felt foreign, like she was mimicking someone else's motions, a marionette with unseen hands tugging the strings. She wasn't alone anymore either. At night in her apartment, shadows moved where they shouldn't. Sometimes, she would wake with a start, certain that someone was standing at the foot of her bed, watching. Weeks passed. She withdrew from the industry, ignored calls from her agent. Whatever had happened in that mansion had stolen something from her. Not just time, something deeper, something vital. She told one close friend about it, whispering her fears into the receiver like saying them out loud would make them real. "Have you seen Diddy since that night?" her friend asked. Maya hesitated, then shook her head. "No, but I feel like he's still watching me." Her friend went pale. "Maya, are you sure it's him?" She didn't answer, because she wasn't sure. Not anymore. She never danced again. Whatever happened at that party had taken more than just her passion. It had taken a piece of her soul, replaced it with something cold and hollow. She could still feel it, a darkness curling inside her, shifting in her reflection like something trying to push through the glass. To this day, Maya can't walk past a mirror without glancing over her shoulder, terrified that this time, she won't be the only one looking back. Because some invitations don't come without a price. And some doors, once opened, never truly close. The invitation arrived on a warm summer evening, a black envelope with her name embossed in gold. The air around it smelled faintly of something metallic, something old. Cassie Ventura held it between her fingers, her heartbeat quickening. She had heard the stories about Diddy's parties, whispers behind manicured hands, half smiles exchanged in dimly lit corridors of the industry. They were legendary, but not just for their extravagance. There was something else, something darker. She stood outside the mansion that night. its silhouette rising against the Los Angeles skyline like the bones of something ancient and slumbering. The air was thick, pressing against her skin, making it hard to breathe. The trees surrounding the estate loomed like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches stretching toward the sky as if trying to claw their way free. The sleek black car that had driven her up the winding hill had already disappeared, leaving her alone before the wrought-iron gates. They creaked open without a sound. No guards, no cameras, as if the house itself had been expecting her. The doors swung open before she could knock. A man in a black suit stood there, his face unnervingly smooth, his eyes empty of anything remotely human. "Miss Ventura, Mr. Combs is waiting for you." Inside, the party throbbed with an unnatural pulse. Chandeliers hung like frozen rain, casting fractured light over the scene. People laughed, sipped champagne from crystal flutes, their faces stretched in plastic perfection. But their eyes were empty. Then she saw him. Diddy stood at the far end of the room, his presence an anchor dragging the atmosphere into something heavier. He turned, and when his gaze locked onto hers, the entire party seemed to fade into silence. His smile was slow, deliberate, predatory. "Cassie," he murmured, his voice low and smooth. "I've been waiting for you." She swallowed, suddenly aware of the way the walls seemed to close in, the way the air smelled faintly of something rotten just beneath the expensive cologne. Come." He extended his hand. Cassie hesitated. Something deep inside her screamed at her to run, but she didn't. His fingers were cold as they wrapped around hers, his grip firm, unyielding. "You have potential," he whispered. "But potential isn't enough, is it? You have to be willing to give something to get something." Her stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" He leaned in closer, his breath cool against her cheek. "There are rules in this world, Cassie, and once you're in forever." The night stretched on in a fever dream. The music pounded, bodies moving like marionettes to an unseen hand. Everywhere she turned, Diddy was there, watching, waiting. The air in the mansion grew heavier, pressing against her lungs like water. The faces around her blurred, twisting, shifting. Their laughter no longer sounded human. At some point, she found herself in a hallway she didn't recognize, the music now a muffled heartbeat far behind her. The walls were lined with mirrors, their glass slick and black like pools of oil. As she stepped forward, something moved in the reflection. Cassie froze. The figure in the mirror wasn't her, not entirely. Its mouth curled into a grotesque grin, its eyes dark voids that seemed to stretch into infinity. And behind her, stood Diddy, but he wasn't human anymore. His face had lengthened, his smile too wide, his eyes endless pits of hunger. "Miss everything," a voice whispered, curling around her like smoke. That's what they called the last one, and the one before her, and the one before that. She spun around, but the hallway was empty. The air hummed with something unseen, something ancient. The mirrors rattled, the glass distorting, and then she saw them. Figures pressed against the glass, their faces stretched in silent screams, their eyes pleading. Trapped. Forgotten. Cassie stumbled back, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The whispers grew louder, rising to a fever pitch. The air thickened, pulling at her skin, her bones, dragging her down into something she couldn't see but could feel. "I can make you a star," Diddy's voice echoed through the hallway. "I can give you everything you've ever dreamed of, but it comes at a price." She looked into the mirror again, and this time, she wasn't looking at herself. She was looking at what she was about to become. A scream ripped from her throat, and then silence. Carlos had spent years clawing his way through the underground music scene. His fingers raw from late nights spent twisting dials, layering beats, chasing a sound that might finally get him out of his cramped one-bedroom apartment. The place smelled like burnt coffee, old takeout, and desperation. The kind that seeps into your bones and makes you do things you swore you never would. His big break always felt just out of reach, a phantom dangling just beyond his grasp. Then one night his phone buzzed. A DM. One of those messages that make your breath hitch in your throat, your skin go clammy. It was from someone deep inside the industry. Someone with real connections. You're invited to an exclusive party this weekend. Diddy will be there. This is your chance. Carlos reread the message, pulse hammering. It had to be real. This was the kind of opportunity that could change everything. But a whisper of doubt curled at the back of his mind, cold and insistent. He'd heard rumors about these parties, things that lurked beneath the flashing lights and champagne-soaked nights. Whispers of rituals, of doors that, once opened, never truly closed. He silenced the thought. Fear had no place here. Not when the alternative was another decade of scraping by, waiting for a break that might never come. The instructions were simple. Midnight, alone. The address led him to the Hollywood Hills, where the road twisted through towering trees, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky. Streetlights flickered, as if afraid of the dark pressing in around them. His palms were slick on the steering wheel when he finally reached the mansion. A fortress of glass and stone, its iron gates yawning open at his arrival. No buzzer, no guards, just a silent welcome. A man in a black suit waited at the door, his face impassive, eyes too dark, too empty. He didn't speak as he ushered Carlos inside. The air was thick, perfume, sweat, something metallic beneath it all. Music pulsed through the walls, a deep bone-rattling bass. Celebrities lounged on velvet couches, models draped over them like expensive scarves. Producers, executives, they were all there, bathing in their own neon glow. But something was wrong. The laughter was too sharp, the smiles too wide, the eyes vacant. Carlos waded through the sea of faces, trying to ground himself. But no one seemed to see him. He was nothing here, a ghost among the glitterati. Then he noticed it, a door at the back of the room slightly ajar. People stole glances at it, their gazes darting away like they were afraid to look for too long. Two men in identical suits flanked the entrance. Beyond it, something pulsed, something that made Carlos's teeth ache. Then she appeared, a woman in black, her beauty sharp enough to draw blood. She pressed a glass of champagne into his hand and leaned in, her breath cool against his ear. "You've been selected." Carlos swallowed hard. For what? She only smiled, and it wasn't a comforting smile. It was the kind of smile that promised things best, left unknown. Then she pointed. The door. His feet moved before his mind could protest. The guard stepped aside without a word, and as he passed the threshold, the music faded, swallowed by something older, deeper, chanting, a low, rhythmic murmur in a language that made his stomach churn. Candles lined the narrow hallway, their flames flickering in an unseen breeze. The walls were too dark, too smooth, as if they absorbed the light. He reached a heavy wooden door and pushed it open. The room inside was vast, cavernous, bathed in the flickering glow of hundreds of candles. At its center stood an altar of polished stone, gleaming with something wet. Around it, figures in black robes, their faces hidden, their voices rising and falling in that strange guttural hymn. On the altar, a goat, bound, its wild, panicked eyes locked onto Carlos. It knew. One of the robed figures stepped forward, a blade catching the candlelight. The chanting swelled, feverish, manic. The knife came down. The goat screamed. Blood poured in thick, glistening streams. Carlos tried to move, to breathe, but the air had weight, pressing against him, suffocating. The shadows on the walls twisted, stretching unnaturally, writhing like living things. A cold hand gripped his shoulder. He spun around. No one was there. Then one of the robed figures stepped forward, hands reaching for the hood. The room fell silent as the fabric slipped away. Carlos's stomach dropped. It was her. Not just any her. The face that had graced magazine covers, red carpets, the screens of millions. A woman the world adored. Oprah Winfrey. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes bottomless voids where something ancient lurked. She took a slow, measured step forward, and Carlos felt his knees buckle. "You weren't supposed to see this," she said, voice smooth as silk. Carlos's throat was dry. His heart pounded against his ribs. "This world you want so badly to be part of," she continued, tilting her head. "It's not what you think. There's a price for everything, Carlos." And now, a pause, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Now that you've seen, there's no going back." Carlos's body took over where his mind failed. He turned and ran, sprinting down the hallway, the chanting rising behind him. The walls seemed to close in, the candlelight flickering out one by one. He burst back into the party, but something was wrong. The music had stopped. The guests were motionless, standing in eerie unison, their eyes locked onto him, vacant, waiting. He didn't wait to see what they were waiting for. He ran, out of the mansion, past the iron gates, down the winding road, as far as his legs would carry him. He left his car, his career, his dreams behind, fleeing into the night like a hunted animal. Carlos disappeared from the music scene after that. Stopped producing. Stopped talking to anyone from his past. When he finally told me what happened, I could see it in his eyes. The fear. The knowledge that some things don't stay buried. He still hears the chanting sometimes, when the night is deep and the world is quiet. And when he does, he knows they are still watching, waiting,